Okay, this is my 5 Web 2.0 tools that I propose to use in an ESL website design project. I teach English as a second language at Oregon State University to international students who will be eventually matriculating into OSU. These students come from China and Saudi Arabia mostly, but we also have students from Japan, Korea. There's a group of students from Papua, as well as other countries in the Middle East. They are enrolled in a course that helps them work with academic writing, as well as research skills, and they need to learn how to conduct good web searches for academic sources. And so this project, in which they create their very own website, contains information about a current event or some sort of relevant problem and solution. Normally this is an essay, but this particular adaptation of the project is to create a website with links to their different sources that they've found. The units that I have created are 50-minute lessons. Normally, this class is meeting 3 times a week for about 50 minutes, but occasionally it may meet more often than that. So 50-minute unit would be appropriate for breaking the lessons down for this particular project. Some of the lessons could be held in the computer labs of the university that are available in terms of resources. And in addition to those particular technology resources, most of the international students, if not all, have their own personal smartphones in which they could access these different Web 2.0 tools. Some of the content that I discuss in these units could potentially be delivered to students outside of class, though for the most part they are face-to-face class meetings. And most of the time I have classes between 16 and the maximum is 22 students. So the 5 Web 2.0 tools that I've selected include first, podcasts and podcast search engines, a web-based web design tool called Wix, collaboration and citation management tools via Google Docs, and particular add-ons, an extension called PaperPile, and then other multimedia resources for doing the relevant research like TED Talks and perhaps YouTube, as well as forums for Creative Commons licensed photos that the students can add to their website. So the first lesson that I've developed is in regards to selecting a topic for what they will be researching, what they will be creating their website about. And I'm sort of excited about this because normally what I do is a session of brainstorming in which everybody comes up with all of these different ideas for what possible topics they could research. And this often leads to really overused topics. For example, I've read so many papers about the legalization of marijuana that it sort of makes me want to cry. So instead of having them brainstorm these topics, I'm thinking that if I could have them do some searches and exploration of podcasts, then they will create the opportunity to discover a topic that, number one, they already have a good source to start with for their research, something they can listen to and not have to worry about the stress of reading all this new vocabulary. So granted, it's a different set of skills, but it sort of opens the possibility of thinking about topics that they wouldn't normally consider. And then something that they can already use from their website, linking to that particular podcast. So I found this aggregate search engine called Podcrawler that looks through all of the iTunes podcasts But you don't have to use the actual iTunes application, which is useful because at least one of the computer labs that we use at OSU is full of PCs rather than iMacs. And so therefore, using something that's web-based and something that also has a link to the website, as you can see here, is really useful in terms of helping the students access podcasts without having to have iTunes or access to iTunes. The other thing that I noticed, in addition to the usefulness of not being tied to iTunes, is that Podcrawler suggests a bunch of different topics. I can have my students start with NPR and go through this list of different possible podcasts. And then they can also type in their own search terms here in the bar if they have, for instance, some topic in mind that they would really be interested in searching. So it could either be kind of a yes, I know what I want situation, or something more like, I'm not really sure what I'm interested in. I'm just going to go through and look at these different podcasts. The second lesson is on website design itself. So students will be all using Wix. I decided that rather than having them have a choice about website design applications, I would just say, okay, everyone's using Wix. I looked at different resources that explained the pluses and minuses of this particular program. And essentially it gives some flexibility, but not a lot. And so I liked the idea of, for their very first website, having something a bit more structured and still having the opportunity to choose a template, most of which are incredibly visually appealing, to customize their website. So students will create their website, they'll practice summarizing their sources and creating content for the website, and then figuring out ways to embed links for those resources that they find directly onto their website. So here's Wix. The one drawback is that when you choose a template for the website that you're creating, that it is permanent. Unless you want to redo your entire website, you can't change it halfway through. So I'll have to make sure that I communicate that clearly to my students. I'll recommend perhaps a blog style website in order for the students to generate different content about their topic. But also I feel like it would be perfectly fine, whatever certain template they decide to use, as long as they're able to drag and drop, which is one of the perceived advantages of this particular application, is that it's extremely user-friendly in terms of just dragging and dropping things. One thing that I will note in addition is that setting some sort of standardized site naming convention, sort of like the way that we've been doing for our own particular class, would be really important so that I could find everybody's stuff. The third lesson is on APA citations. So here I found that Google Docs would be really important for students to be able to generate their content in a word processor before then moving it to their website. This would also be important for me as a teacher to be able to look at what they're generating and edit it or comment about certain things that they should include or not include. And then the Web 2.0 tool that I found here, which Dr. Greg had sort of tweeted about a while ago, was this awesome extension called Paperfile, which is a way that students can have a search bar here on the side of their Google Doc to find this particular resource that they're using, and then it generates it in APA citation format. And for me, I'm interested in having students understand that there are different formats for creating citations, but I'm not as hung up about, making sure they know that as I'm typing it out, this is where the period goes, blah, blah, blah. Having some sort of system to make sure that they're doing it correctly, that they can also use later in other classes, seems to be really important. The fourth lesson is on research and multimedia. So in addition to using library resources to find academic research articles, I am also trying to see if students will be willing to look through TED Talks and other YouTube videos in order to extend their research skills. And here what I really want to emphasize is that oftentimes research is more about an individual, an expert, than the actual article or format of delivery. So if I'm researching something that I know there's a particular professor at a certain institution that specializes in, maybe I don't search for the topic, but I search for the person. And finally, lesson 5 is about graphics and photos. This is more about the aesthetics of the website, and I think in this particular lesson I could also emphasize elements of design and what makes it a user-friendly website, so that we can talk about all of those visual elements. And I also here would bring up the fact that in using photos from the web, we need to make sure that we're using something that other people have given us permission to use. And I think this ties in really well with the entire philosophy of making sure that we give credit where credit's due. Many of my students are not from cultures where this is emphasized as much. And so helping them to understand that the Creative Commons license and other things are taken very seriously here in the United States, I think is really important. So the learning outcomes, quickly, students will be able to, by the end of this project, use media tools for exploring academic topics, understand the particular procedures that we use for academic research in terms of doing web searches and identifying which sources are appropriate for academic research, using APA-style citations and Creative Commons images, creating a website that delivers academic content surrounding a particular topic of their choice, as well as generating a bunch, hopefully, of well-formed sentences and paragraphs that is sort of an alternative to an essay style project. Thank you so much for your attention.